Steve Harvey froze when a contestant said, "People like you shouldn't host." Not for a second, not for a moment, but in a way that made everyone in the room understand that something invisible had just shattered. He spent decades perfecting the art of recovery, turning awkward moments into punchlines, deflecting tension with charm, staying in control. But in that instant, no amount of preparation could have prevented what happened next. This is the story of what that freeze reveals. Not about his career, not about his past, but about the invisible weight that successful people carry, and what happens when someone finally names it out loud. What you're about to see will change how you think about what it really costs to belong. Steve Harvey walks into the studio on a Tuesday afternoon like he's walked in 1,000 times before. The lights are bright. The audience is buzzing. The energy is electric. Everything is exactly as it should be. But something is different today, and he feels it the moment his feet hit the stage. There's a weight on his shoulders. Not the kind you can see. Not the kind anyone would notice if they were watching him from the audience. It's the kind of weight that only he can feel. The kind that's been there so long, he's almost forgotten what it feels like to set it down. He's not just a host, he's proof. Proof that a kid from Cleveland who grew up with nothing can become something. Proof that a man who looked a certain way, talked a certain way, came from a certain background, can still make it to the top. Proof that the system, despite everything, can work. That barriers can be broken. That representation matters. That dreams aren't just for people born with silver spoons. That hard work, determination, and an unwavering belief in yourself can actually change your entire life trajectory. But here's what nobody talks about. Being proof is exhausting. Every single time he walks on that stage, he's carrying the hopes and expectations of millions of people who see themselves in him. Every joke he tells has to land perfectly. Every decision he makes has to be defensible. Every comment he makes has to be appropriate. Every moment has to validate the space he occupies. Because if he fails, it's not just his failure. It's evidence. Evidence that maybe the skeptics were right all along. Evidence that maybe people like him really don't belong here. Evidence that maybe the system was right to doubt him in the first place. He's internalized this so completely that he doesn't even notice it anymore. It's just part of him now. Like breathing. Like his heartbeat. Like the constant, quiet hum of anxiety that never fully goes away. The kind that wakes him up at 3 in the morning with a racing heart and 1,000 questions he can't answer. Steve smiles at the audience as the music plays. The smile is genuine. He loves this. He genuinely loves connecting with people. He loves the energy of live television. He loves the unpredictability of it, the way every show is different, the way the audience feeds off his energy and he feeds off theirs. It's intoxicating. It's what he was born to do. But underneath that smile, there's something else happening. Something he's been managing so skillfully for so long that even he sometimes forgets it's there. The doubt. The question that haunts every successful person who's had to fight twice as hard to get half as far. Do I really deserve to be here? And more terrifying than that, will I ever be enough? Not enough for the skeptics. Not enough for the people waiting for him to fail. Not enough to silence the voice in his head that whispers, "You got lucky. You got lucky, and one day everyone's going to figure it out." He's answered that question 1,000 times. With achievements, with accolades, with decades of undeniable success, with millions of fans who tune in specifically to see him, with a career that spans generations, with a reputation built on authenticity and connection. He's proven it over and over and over again, in ways that should be irrefutable, that should be beyond question, that should satisfy even the harshest critics. But proof never feels permanent. Proof can always be questioned. Proof can always be challenged by one person with one comment at the wrong moment. Proof is fragile in a way that nothing else is fragile. And that's the invisible weight he carries every single day. The knowledge that no matter how high he climbs, no matter how many people love him, no matter how many shows he hosts or books he writes or lives he touches, there will always be someone, somewhere, who questions whether he deserves to be there. Not because of what he's done, but because of who he is. Not because of his talent or his work ethic or his contributions, but because of something far more fundamental. Something that can't be changed by success or achievement or accolades. This weight has become so familiar that he doesn't even recognize it as a burden anymore. It's just his life. It's just the price of admission. It's just what it costs to be here. It's the tax you pay for breaking barriers, for being first, for being seen as a symbol of something larger than yourself. He's made peace with it. Or so he tells himself on the good days. On the days when the show goes great and the audience loves him and the energy is perfect. On the days when he can convince himself that the weight is just a figment of his imagination. Just paranoia. Just the voice of insecurity that all successful people have to manage. But deep down, in the part of him that he doesn't talk about in interviews, in the part of him that only surfaces at 3 a.m. or during quiet moments alone, he knows the truth. The weight is real, and it never goes away. On this particular Tuesday, as he's about to find out, peace is about to be shattered by 7 words spoken by a complete stranger. 7 words that will crack open everything he's spent his entire career holding together. 7 words that will make the invisible weight suddenly, undeniably visible to everyone in the room. He doesn't know this yet. He's still smiling. He's still in control. He's still performing the version of Steve Harvey that the world knows and loves. The confident, charming, quick-thinking host who always knows exactly what to say and how to say it. But in a matter of minutes, something is going to happen that will test everything he's built. Something is going to happen that will force him to confront the invisible weight he's been carrying for so long. Something is going to happen that will make him freeze in a way that will reveal more truth than 1,000 interviews ever could. And when it happens, the entire room will feel it. The audience will sense it. The cameras will capture it. And the world will see for perhaps the first time what it really costs to be here. But he had no idea that today would be the day someone would finally say out loud what he'd been feeling in silence. The contestant walks out with confidence. You can see it in the way they carry themselves, shoulders back, head high, eyes sharp. This isn't someone intimidated by the stage or by Steve Harvey. This isn't someone who's going to be starstruck or nervous or deferential. They've got something to prove. Steve reads this instantly. He's been doing this long enough to know the energy of a room before a single word is spoken. He can sense when someone is going to be easy, when someone is going to be difficult, when someone has an agenda. And this person, they have an agenda. The energy shifts, barely perceptibly to the audience watching at home, but noticeably to Steve. It's like when you're walking down a dark street and you suddenly sense that you're not alone. You don't see anything yet. You don't have proof of anything yet. But something in your nervous system picks up on a signal that your conscious mind hasn't caught up to. Steve adjusts. It's subtle. A slight tightening around his eyes. A barely perceptible shift in his posture. The smile stays exactly the same, but it becomes slightly more guarded. He's still in control. He's still confident, but now he's aware. Now he's paying attention in a different way. "So, tell me about yourself," Steve says, doing what he always does. Opening the door, inviting the story, setting up the connection that will make the moment more powerful when it inevitably comes. The contestant starts talking. Background, family, what brought them here? The usual setup that happens hundreds of times on this stage. But there's something underneath the words. There's an edge. There's a sharpness that's different from the usual nervous energy or the usual excitement of being on television. Steve is listening, but he's also listening for something else. He's listening for the moment. He's listening for the thing that's coming. He doesn't know what it is yet, but he can feel it building, like pressure before a storm, like the moment right before something breaks. The contestant is building to something. You can feel it in the way they're telling the story. They're not just making conversation. They're not just filling time. They're setting up a narrative. They're creating a foundation. They're establishing context for something they're about to say. And Steve can sense it. His survival instincts are firing. His experience is kicking in. Some part of him that's been honed by decades of live television is sending out a warning signal. Brace yourself. Something's coming. But he doesn't know what. And that's the thing about facing criticism or challenge in the moment. You can feel it coming, but you can't prepare for the specific shape it's going to take. You can't anticipate the exact words. You can't build a defense against something you haven't heard yet. The contestant continues talking. Building. Getting closer to the point. Getting closer to whatever it is they came here to say. And Steve sits there, smiling, listening, nodding at all the right moments. But internally, he's bracing. Internally, he's preparing for impact. The audience doesn't feel it yet. The cameras don't capture it. The viewers at home won't notice it when they watch the clip later. But in this moment, in this room, there's a tension building between Steve Harvey and this contestant. There's a charge in the air. There's a sense that something significant is about to happen. And then the contestant says something. Not the big thing yet. But something that's pointed, something that's clearly directed at Steve. Something that makes it clear that this person didn't come here to be charming or to connect or to play the game the way contestants usually do. They came here to challenge him. Steve's smile doesn't falter. But something in his eyes changes. It's a microsecond shift, but it's there. Recognition. Understanding. The moment where he realizes that this isn't going to be a normal interaction. This isn't going to be a typical back and forth with a contestant. This is going to be something else entirely. The tension in the room is now palpable. The audience senses it. You can see people in the crowd shift slightly in their seats. You can feel the energy change from the comfortable, fun atmosphere of a typical game show to something more charged, something more real, something more dangerous. Steve adjusts again. Not his demeanor, not his persona, but his internal state. He's moving from relaxation into alertness. He's moving from entertainment mode into something else. He's preparing for the moment that's about to come, the moment that will define this entire interaction. The contestant keeps talking. They're almost there now. You can feel it. The words are coming. The challenge is about to be named. The invisible thing that's been humming underneath this entire conversation is about to become explicit. And Steve is waiting, smiling, listening, but underneath it all, bracing for impact. Because somewhere in the next few seconds, those 7 words are about to be spoken. And nothing will ever be quite the same after that. The audience has no idea what's about to happen, but everyone in the room can feel that something is about to break. The contestant leans forward slightly. It's a physical gesture that signals intention. They're not asking a question. They're not making small talk. They're not setting up a joke or trying to connect in the way that most people do when they're on a stage with Steve Harvey. They're delivering a message, and then they say it. People like you shouldn't host. 7 words. That's all it takes. 7 words to shatter everything that's been carefully constructed over decades. 7 words to make the invisible suddenly, undeniably visible. 7 words to crack open the facade and expose the weight that's been underneath all along. 7 words to articulate the fear that has haunted him since the very beginning of his career. The fear that he doesn't belong here, that he's an imposter, that one day everyone will figure out that he's not supposed to be in this position. For a fraction of a second, and it really is just a fraction, maybe 2 or 3 frames of film, nothing happens. Steve's smile doesn't disappear. His posture doesn't collapse. He doesn't jump up or react dramatically or do any of the things that would immediately signal to everyone watching that he's been hit. He doesn't turn red. He doesn't stammer. He doesn't do anything that would make it obvious that something has just fundamentally shifted. But he freezes. Not physically, in a way that's immediately obvious to the untrained eye. Not in a way that's dramatic or theatrical. But internally, spiritually, emotionally. Everything stops. The constant machinery of performance, of charm, of wit, of deflection, of control. It all halts for just a moment. The engine that's been running continuously for decades suddenly goes silent. Because in that moment, he's not Steve Harvey, the host. He's not the guy with the perfect response ready to go. He's not the man who spent decades learning how to turn any situation into a moment of connection or comedy or wisdom. He's not the performer who knows exactly how to read a room and adjust his energy to match what's needed. He's just a man who just heard someone say out loud the thing he's been afraid of his entire life. The thing he's thought about in the dark. The thing he's wondered about when he's alone. The thing that no amount of success or validation or achievement has ever fully silenced. The words hang in the air. They don't disappear. They don't get laughed off by the audience. They don't get deflected with a joke or a clever comeback or one of his signature witty observations. They don't get smoothed over with charm or confidence or the kind of charisma that usually allows him to navigate any social situation with ease. They just sit. There, heavy and real and undeniable, in the space between them. And in that frozen moment, that split second where Steve Harvey's carefully constructed persona cracks open, something shifts in his face that the cameras will capture and the internet will replay 1,000,000 times over. It's not anger. It's not the kind of righteous indignation that you might expect from someone being attacked on live television. It's not defensiveness in the traditional sense. It's something far more vulnerable than any of those things. It's recognition. It's the look of someone who's just heard their deepest fear articulated by a stranger on live television. It's the look of someone who spent their entire career proving that he belongs in this space, only to have someone say, in the simplest possible terms, that he doesn't. It's the look of someone whose internal narrative has just been made external, whose private doubt has just become public fact. It's the look of a man confronting the fundamental question that has defined his entire existence. What if they're right? The freeze lasts maybe 2 or 3 seconds. In normal conversation, that's nothing. That's just the natural pause between one person speaking and another responding. But in television time, in the time that's captured on camera and broadcast to millions of people, in the time where every microsecond is magnified and scrutinized and analyzed, 2 or 3 seconds is an eternity. It's enough time for millions of people watching at home to notice something is wrong. It's enough time for the energy in the room to completely shift from the comfortable, entertaining atmosphere of a game show to something far more real and far more tense. It's enough time for everyone, the audience, the crew, the cameras, the people watching at home, to understand that this is not a normal moment. This is a moment where something true is being revealed. Steve's mind is racing. You can sense it even in the silence. The calculation, the processing, the rapid-fire decision-making happening in real time. What do I do right now? How do I respond to this? Do I acknowledge what was just said? Do I deflect with humor like I always do? Do I get angry and shut it down? Do I try to educate this person about why they're wrong? Do I dismiss them? Do I engage seriously? Do I protect myself, or do I be vulnerable? All of these options are running through his head in the span of those frozen seconds. All of these possible responses are being evaluated and weighed and considered. And none of them feel right. None of them feel like an adequate response to what's just been said. And here's the thing that makes this moment so profoundly powerful. For just a moment, Steve Harvey doesn't have an answer. For just a moment, the man who always knows what to say, who's famous for his quick wit and his ability to navigate any social situation with grace and humor and wisdom, he doesn't know what to say. The man who spent his entire career in control, who spent his entire life learning how to manage situations and people and narratives, loses control. Because this isn't something he can charm his way out of. This isn't something he can deflect with humor or turn into a teaching moment or navigate with his signature combination of confidence and self-deprecation. This isn't a situation where his experience and his talent and his years of expertise can provide a solution. This isn't a problem that can be solved with a clever comeback or a well-placed joke or even with genuine wisdom and sincerity. Because what the contestant has done is name the thing that can't be unnamed. They've spoken the quiet part out loud. They've taken the invisible weight and made it visible. They've articulated the fear that he's carried in silence and made it impossible to ignore. And now everyone in the room has to deal with it. Now the audience has to confront it. Now the cameras have to capture it. Now the world has to witness it. The freeze reveals everything in that moment. It reveals the weight that he's been carrying all these years. It reveals the doubt that lives underneath the confidence. It reveals the years of pressure and expectation and the constant question of whether he really deserves to be here, whether he truly belongs in this space, whether his success is earned or accidental. It reveals that underneath all the confidence and charm and success and accolades and decades of achievement, there's still a man who carries a fundamental insecurity about his right to occupy this space. A man who, no matter how high he climbs, still sometimes wonders if he's supposed to be there. And that's what makes the freeze so devastating. Not because of what the contestant said, but because of what Steve's reaction reveals about how deeply those words landed, about how real the fear is, about how much power this moment has to shake the foundation of everything he's built. The contestant is watching him, waiting for the response, waiting to see how he's going to handle this challenge, waiting to see if he's going to get defensive or angry or try to shut them down. The audience is watching, leaning forward in their seats, sensing that something significant is happening. The cameras are rolling, capturing every frame, every flicker of expression, every moment of this frozen silence. The entire room is suspended in this moment of silence and stillness and vulnerability. And Steve is frozen. Not because he doesn't know what to say next. Not because he's lost for words in the technical sense. but because he's just had a moment of absolute clarity about something he's been avoiding his entire career. He's had a moment where the invisible weight became suddenly, undeniably real and visible and impossible to ignore. In that freeze, in that split second where he's not performing, and not managing, and not controlling the narrative, and not being the version of himself that the world expects to see, the truth is visible. The raw, unfiltered truth. The truth that no amount of success can ever fully erase the fundamental question that haunts him. Do I belong here? And when that question is spoken out loud by someone else, when it's no longer just a voice in your head, but an actual challenge spoken in a room full of people and cameras and millions of viewers, when it's suddenly made real and external and undeniable, something happens that no amount of preparation can prevent. You freeze. Because in that moment, you're not thinking about your response. You're not calculating your next move or planning how to regain control of the narrative. You're thinking about the question itself. You're thinking about whether it might be true. You're thinking about all the times you've asked yourself the same thing in the privacy of your own mind. You're thinking about all the reasons you might not belong in this space. You're thinking about the fragility of everything you've built and how quickly it could all come crashing down. You're confronting the thing you've spent your entire life trying to outrun. And all of that happens in the space of a freeze. All of that vulnerability and fear and truth is exposed in those 2 or 3 seconds of silence. But what happens next is even more revealing than the freeze itself. The freeze breaks. Steve's mind catches up to the moment. The shock gives way to something else. The vulnerability recedes, and the performer re-emerges. But it's different this time. It's not the same smooth, controlled version of Steve Harvey that walked out on stage. Something has shifted. He takes a breath. A real breath. You can see his chest expand. You can see him physically pulling himself back together, gathering the pieces of his composure that just scattered across the floor. And then he speaks. But here's what's crucial. The way he responds reveals everything about what just happened. Because he doesn't respond with anger. He doesn't respond with defensiveness. He doesn't respond with the kind of arrogance that would protect his ego or shut down the conversation. He responds with something far more revealing. He responds with a question, a genuine question, not rhetorical, not designed to trap the contestant or make them look foolish, but an actual inquiry about what they meant, about where that came from, about what they were really trying to say. And in that question, you can hear something breaking open. You can hear the cracks in the armor. You can hear the moment where Steve Harvey stops being the host and starts being a human being confronting something real. The contestant elaborates. They explain their position. They talk about representation and who should and shouldn't be in certain spaces. They articulate their challenge more fully. And Steve listens. He actually listens. Not to find the flaw in their argument, not to prepare his counterattack, but to understand what they're saying. And as he listens, something is happening internally. The initial shock is wearing off. The vulnerability is being processed. The fear is being acknowledged. And in its place, something else is emerging. Clarity. Because here's the thing about having your deepest fear spoken out loud. Sometimes it actually helps. Sometimes when the thing you've been avoiding finally gets named, you realize that you can survive it. You realize that the world doesn't end. You realize that you're still standing. You realize that despite the fear and the doubt and the insecurity, you haven't collapsed. And that realization is powerful. Steve's response, when it fully comes, is not what you'd expect. It's not a defense of his credentials or his accomplishments or his right to be there. It's not an attack on the contestant for being disrespectful or inappropriate. It's an acknowledgement. He acknowledges what they said. He acknowledges that the weight they're describing is real. He acknowledges that representation matters and that there are legitimate questions about who gets to be in spaces of power and visibility. He doesn't dismiss their concern as ignorant or invalid. Instead, he engages with it. He takes it seriously. He treats it like the serious challenge it is. And in doing so, he does something remarkable. He transforms the moment from an attack into a conversation. He takes the confrontation and turns it into something more nuanced and more real. But here's what's most revealing. In his response, you can hear the weight in his voice. You can hear the tiredness. You can hear the years of carrying something that shouldn't have to be carried alone. You can hear the burden of representation in every word. Because that's what the freeze revealed, and that's what the response confirms. Steve Harvey understands exactly what the contestant is saying, because he's been thinking about it too. He understands the question of representation. He understands the weight of being seen as a symbol. He understands what it means to occupy a space that people said someone like him shouldn't occupy. He's been living with that his entire career. And in this moment, in this interaction with this contestant, all of that comes to the surface. The fear is still there. The doubt is still there. The insecurity is still there. But so is something else. So is the evidence of decades of work and dedication and proving himself over and over again. The response doesn't erase the freeze. The response doesn't undo what was revealed in that moment of vulnerability. But it does show what happens when you survive that moment. It shows what happens when you face the fear and don't collapse under it. It shows what happens when you take the challenge seriously and respond with humanity rather than ego. And that's what makes this moment so profound. Not just the freeze, but what comes after. Not just the vulnerability, but the recovery. Not just the question being asked, but the way it's received and engaged with. Steve Harvey's response shows that despite everything, despite the freeze, despite the fear, despite the weight, he's still standing, he's still thinking, he's still capable of growth and change and taking feedback seriously. He's still human. And that humanity, that vulnerability, that willingness to engage rather than dismiss, that's what the moment ultimately reveals. That's what the audience sees. That's what the world will remember. Not just the moment where the host froze, but the moment where the host became real. And in becoming real, he revealed something that no performance could ever capture. The truth of what it costs to be here. But the moment doesn't end there. The conversation continues, but everything has shifted. The energy in the room is different now. The audience can feel it. The cameras are capturing something real, something unscripted, something that goes beyond the typical game show format. Steve sits there, and you can see him processing. Not just the words that were said, but the implications of those words. Not just the challenge, but what the challenge means about his position, his role, his entire existence in this space. And here's where it gets deeper. The contestant's words. People like you shouldn't host. They're not just about Steve Harvey. They're about something far larger. They're about representation. They're about power. They're about who gets to be seen and who doesn't. They're about systems and structures and the invisible rules that determine who belongs and who doesn't. And Steve knows this. He understands it deeply because he's lived it. Think about what it means to be Steve Harvey. Think about what it means to build a career in entertainment when people have preconceived notions about what you should be able to do. Think about the constant pressure to prove yourself. Think about the weight of knowing that every mistake, every misstep, every moment of being human is magnified because you're not just representing yourself, you're representing something bigger. That's the weight that the contestant just named. That's the weight that caused the freeze. Because in that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't just hearing criticism about his hosting ability. He was hearing the accumulated doubt and skepticism and gatekeeping that he's encountered his entire career. He was hearing the voice that says, "You don't belong here. People like you don't belong here." There are rules about who gets to occupy certain spaces, and you're breaking those rules just by existing in them. And that voice is both external and internal. It comes from other people, yes. But it also comes from within. It comes from the part of him that has internalized the message that he's not supposed to be here, that he's lucky to be here, that he should be grateful to be here rather than confident that he deserves to be here. The weight is in that contradiction. The weight is in having to prove yourself over and over again while simultaneously being told that no amount of proof will ever be enough. The weight is in knowing that your presence in a space is inherently political. The weight is in understanding that you're not just doing a job. You're representing a movement, a cause, a statement about what's possible. And nobody should have to carry that weight alone. But that's what Steve Harvey has been doing. That's what he's been carrying for decades. Every time he walks out on that stage, he's not just walking out as a host. He's walking out as a symbol. He's walking out as a representative. He's walking out as proof that someone like him can be here, can be successful, can be respected and admired and trusted to be in a position of authority. The freeze happened because the contestant named this weight out loud. They said the thing that Steve Harvey has been afraid of his entire career. That despite everything he's accomplished, there are still people who don't think he should be here. And the terrifying part, the part that makes the freeze so devastating, is that Steve Harvey can't completely dismiss this fear as unfounded. Because he knows that there are systems and biases and structures in place that do gatekeep these spaces. He knows that representation matters. He knows that the question of who gets to be visible and powerful and respected is not a neutral question. So when the contestant says, "People like you shouldn't host," they're not just making a personal attack. They're articulating a real structural concern. And Steve knows it. He understands it. He's probably thought about it many times. The freeze is the moment where all of that becomes impossible to ignore. And what happens in the moments after, the response, the engagement, the conversation, it's all an attempt to process this weight. It's all an attempt to make sense of something that can't fully be made sense of. It's all an attempt to transform the weight into something that can be spoken about, acknowledged, engaged with. But the weight remains. Even after the moment passes, even after the conversation ends, even after Steve Harvey moves on to the next contestant and the next moment, the weight is still there. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't get resolved. It doesn't get neatly packaged into a lesson or a moment of growth. It just sits there. Heavy, real, undeniable. And that's what the freeze reveals. Not weakness, but the exhaustion of carrying something that shouldn't have to be carried alone. Not insecurity, but the very human response to being confronted with the accumulated doubt of a lifetime. Not vulnerability as a flaw, but vulnerability as the honest truth of what it costs to be here. The contestant spoke a truth. And the freeze was Steve Harvey's body and mind and spirit telling him that the truth had landed, that it had penetrated the armor, that it had reached something real and tender and essential. And in that moment, despite all his success, despite all his accomplishments, despite decades of proving himself. Steve Harvey was just a man confronting the fundamental question, do I belong here? And the answer, the real answer, the honest answer, is complicated. Yes, he belongs here based on talent and hard work and decades of dedication. Yes, he belongs here based on his accomplishments and his success and his ability to connect with audiences. But he also carries the weight of representation. He also carries the burden of being a symbol. He also carries the insecurity that comes from knowing that there are people who will never think he belongs, no matter what he accomplishes. That's the weight. That's what the freeze revealed. And what comes next will test that weight in ways that nobody could have anticipated. Time slows down in the moments that follow. The studio lights seem brighter. The silence seems louder. The air in the room feels charged with something electric and dangerous and real. Everyone is waiting to see what happens next. Because this isn't a normal moment on a game show anymore. This has become something else entirely. This has become a moment where the carefully constructed walls between performance and reality are crumbling, and nobody knows what's going to emerge from the rubble. Steve sits with the weight of what's just been said. He's had his freeze. That moment of absolute vulnerability where everything he's worked to hide was suddenly exposed. He's given his response, that carefully considered, thoughtfully constructed acknowledgement of what was said. He's engaged with the challenger, treating their words with the seriousness they deserve rather than dismissing them or shutting them down. But now comes the hardest part. He has to figure out what to do with this moment. He has to decide whether to let it pass, to move on, to pretend it didn't shake something fundamental inside him. Or he has to acknowledge it. He has to name it. He has to make the invisible visible in a way that transforms not just this moment, but everything that comes after. And here's the thing that nobody expected. Steve Harvey does something that very few people in his position would have the courage to do. He gets real. Not in a way that's performative or calculated for maximum emotional impact. Not in a way that's designed to make him look good, or to win sympathy from the audience, or to position himself as the victim of an unfair attack. But in a way that's genuine and raw and completely honest about what just happened and what it means. In a way that exposes the fundamental truth that he's been protecting behind layers of charm and wit and professional distance. He talks about representation. He talks about the responsibility that comes with being in a space where people who look like him were never supposed to be. He talks about walking into rooms where he's the first. He talks about sitting in chairs that were never meant for someone like him. He talks about the constant awareness that his presence is breaking some unspoken rule, challenging some invisible boundary, forcing people to confront their own assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. He talks about the fear. He articulates it directly, without softening it or trying to make it seem smaller than it is. He talks about the fear of failure, not just personal failure, but the fear that if he fails, it won't just be him that fails. It will be everyone who looks like him. It will be used as evidence that people like him don't belong in these spaces. It will be ammunition for everyone who said this was a mistake from the beginning. He acknowledges the weight without trying to minimize it or make it seem like it doesn't matter. He doesn't say, I don't think about it, or I've moved past it, or any of the things that would suggest that decades of achievement have erased the fundamental insecurity. Instead, he names it. He gives it voice. He makes it audible to everyone in the room and everyone watching at home. And in doing this, something shifts not just in him, but in the entire room. The energy transforms. The dynamic completely changes. The audience feels it. They lean forward in their seats. They stop fidgeting. They stop thinking about their phones or what they're going to eat after the show. They stop existing in their own private thoughts and instead become fully present to what's happening in this moment. Some of them are uncomfortable. Some of them are moved. Some of them are seeing something they've never seen before. A moment of complete vulnerability on a game show stage. The contestant feels it too. They came to challenge. They came to make a point. They came to speak truth to power. But what they're hearing now is not a defense. What they're hearing is not someone trying to prove them wrong or shut them down or minimize what they said. What they're hearing is an acknowledgement that their point is valid, that the weight they're describing is real, that the representation question they're asking is important and deserves to be taken seriously. The cameras capture it. Every frame, every moment of the mask falling away, every instant where Steve Harvey stops being the polished host and becomes just a man telling the truth. The cameras are rolling, and they're capturing something that will be replayed and analyzed and discussed for years to come. The world will see it. The moment will spread. People will share it. People will dissect it. People will write about it and talk about it and use it as evidence of something. Something about representation, about power, about the cost of breaking barriers, about what it means to be seen and to occupy space in a world that wasn't built for you. This is no longer just entertainment. This is testimony. This is witness. This is truth-telling happening in real time on live television. This is a moment where the mask is completely removed, and what remains is just the raw, unfiltered humanity of a man confronting something he's been running from his entire life. Steve Harvey talks about the pressure. He articulates it in ways that go beyond just the abstract concept. He talks about the specific moments. The moments where he second-guesses a decision because he's worried about what it will mean. The moments where he's hyper-aware that he's being watched more closely than his predecessors were. The moments where he wonders if every mistake is being magnified because of who he is, not just because it's a mistake. He talks about knowing that every decision he makes reflects not just on him, but on everyone who looks like him. That's the weight. That's the burden. That's the thing that makes this job fundamentally different from what it would be if he were someone else. It's not just about whether he does well or poorly. It's about what his success or failure means in a larger context. It's about whether his presence opens doors or slams them shut. It's about whether his achievement is seen as proof that the system works or as an exception that proves the rule. He talks about the constant awareness that he's being watched, that he's being judged, that his presence is inherently political. He can't just be a host. He has to be a representative. He can't just make mistakes and move on like anyone else would. His mistakes are evidence. His failures are ammunition. His presence is a statement whether he wants it to be or not. He talks about the exhaustion of carrying that weight every single day. Not in a way that's asking for pity or looking for sympathy, but in a way that's just honest about what it costs. What it costs to show up. What it costs to keep going. What it costs to maintain the performance, the professionalism, the composure. When underneath there's all this doubt and fear and weight. And as he's talking, you can see something happening in his face. The mask is completely gone now. The performance is over. The carefully constructed persona that he's spent decades building. The charming host. The man who always knows what to say. The professional who can navigate any situation with grace. It's all fallen away. What you're seeing is just Steve Harvey. A man, not a symbol, not a representative. Not a statement about representation or power or who belongs where. Just a human being who has spent his entire life trying to prove that he belongs in a space that people said he shouldn't be in. And that's more powerful than any performance could ever be. The contestant listens. And something shifts in them too. Because they came to challenge. They came to make a point about systems and structures and who should and shouldn't have access to certain spaces. They came with a message, a critique, a challenge to the status quo. But what they're hearing is not a rebuttal. What they're hearing is not someone trying to prove them wrong or shut them down or minimize the validity of their concern. What they're hearing is someone acknowledging that the concern is valid, that the weight they're describing is real, that the question they're asking about representation is important and necessary and deserves to be taken seriously. And in that acknowledgement, something changes. The energy shifts again. The conversation becomes less adversarial and more collaborative. It becomes less about winning and more about understanding. It becomes less about proving a point and more about telling the truth. It becomes less about challenging the host and more about having a genuine dialogue about something that matters. Steve talks about why he chose to stay. Why, despite the weight and the pressure and the constant question of whether he belongs, he chose to keep showing up. He could have walked away. He could have let the doubt overwhelm him. He could have internalized the message that people like him don't belong in spaces like this and stepped aside. But he didn't. He talks about the responsibility he feels to the people who see themselves reflected in him. He talks about the young people who are watching. He talks about the people who have been told their entire lives that certain doors are closed to them, that certain spaces are not for people like them, that they should lower their expectations and accept the roles they've been assigned. He talks about what it means for those people to see him there, to see someone who looks like them, who comes from where they come from, who has faced the same doubts and fears and barriers, occupying a space of authority and respect and success. He talks about the responsibility that comes with that visibility. He talks about the obligation he feels to not let them down, to not confirm the fears of those who said this was a mistake, to prove that he deserves to be there. And he talks about the impact of being visible in spaces where visibility has historically been denied. He talks about how much it matters, how much it means, how much it changes the landscape just by existing, just by showing up, just by refusing to apologize for occupying space. He talks about the fact that he knows there are people watching who will never think he belongs, no matter what he does. That there are people who will always see him as an affirmative action hire, as someone who got lucky, as someone who doesn't deserve to be there but got there anyway. And he's made peace with that to some extent. He's learned to live with the fact that his presence will always be controversial to some people, always be seen as a statement, always be political. But he also talks about something else, something that transcends the fear and the weight and the constant pressure. He talks about the fact that he's still here, that despite the fear and the weight and the constant pressure to fail, to prove everyone right who said he didn't belong, he's still showing up. He's still doing the work. He's still occupying the space. And that act of still being here, in the face of all that doubt and all that pressure and all that weight, is an act of resistance. It's an act of defiance. It's an act of claiming that he does belong here. Not because he's been given permission, not because everyone agrees, but because he's earned it through decades of dedication and work. The freeze wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't evidence that he doesn't belong or that the contestant was right or that the question is unanswerable. The freeze was a moment of honesty. It was the moment where all the accumulated weight became visible. It was the moment where the invisible question that has haunted his entire career became impossible to ignore. It was the moment where the mask cracked And what emerged was the raw truth of what it costs to be here. And the response, not just the words he said in that immediate moment, but the conversation that followed, the honesty that emerged, the vulnerability that he allowed to be captured on camera, the truth that he spoke, even though it would have been easier to deflect or dismiss or move on. That's what transforms the moment from a challenge into a reckoning. A reckoning with representation. A reckoning with power. A reckoning with who gets to be visible and why that matters. A reckoning with the cost of breaking barriers that were never supposed to be broken. A reckoning with what it means to occupy space in a world that wasn't built for you. And the most powerful part of this reckoning is that it's not resolved. It's not neat. It doesn't end with Steve Harvey triumphing over his doubter or proving that he belongs or silencing the voice of doubt forever. It ends with him acknowledging that the question is valid, that the weight is real, and that he's chosen to carry it anyway. That despite everything, despite knowing that there are people who will never accept his right to be there, despite understanding that his presence is inherently political and controversial, he's still here. Because that's the real power of the moment. Not that he conquered the fear or answered the question definitively or found some clever way to make it all go away, but that he faced it. He acknowledged it. He made it visible to millions of people watching. He showed that even after decades of success, even after all the accolades and achievements, even after proving himself over and over again, the fundamental question remains unanswered. Do I belong here? And his answer, implicit in every word he speaks, every gesture he makes, every moment of continued presence on that stage, is yes. Not because I was given permission, not because everyone agrees, not because the weight has disappeared or the fear has been conquered, but because I've earned it, and I'm not going anywhere. That's what the freeze revealed. That's what the response confirmed. That's what the reckoning makes clear. Steve Harvey froze because he heard the truth. And the truth was that the weight is real. The pressure is real. The question is real. The fear is real. All of it. Everything that he's been carrying, everything that he's been protecting behind the charm and the wit and the professionalism, it's all real. And he's been carrying all of it, alone, for decades. Every day, every moment on that stage, every decision, every performance, all the weight, all the pressure, all the responsibility, all the fear. But in this moment, in this conversation with this contestant, something shifts. The weight is no longer invisible. It's no longer carried in silence. It's no longer something that only Steve Harvey has to deal with internally, something he has to hide and protect and manage on his own. It becomes public. It becomes witnessed. It becomes real in a way that transforms not just Steve Harvey, but everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone who sees themselves reflected in this moment, everyone who has ever felt the weight of representation, everyone who has ever questioned whether they belong, everyone who has ever been told that people like them don't belong in certain spaces. And that's when the full significance of the freeze becomes undeniable. Because the freeze was never just about Steve Harvey. It was about all of us.